All right, welcome into episode 23 of the Avetts And Beyond. My name is Todd Emanuele, and I am joined by a very special guest. I'm excited about this one because this is a little different path than we've taken during the show so far. I have a very special guest here today. Alex Sosler is here. Alex is, can I say, an author? I mean, you're one of the many things that you do. You
That's
are
true.
the assistant professor of Bible and ministry at Montreat College in Montreat, North Carolina. Also assisting priest at Redeemer and Anglican Church in Asheville, North Carolina. And I'm really happy that you're here with me today.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So this is cool. So you have a book that is out now because I know other Avett fans have been getting it in the mail and it's been showing up and they're all excited about it. But I want to hear about this book because I saw a thing about it a long time ago when it was first being talked about, and it fascinated me. And I was thinking, is this a textbook?
Mm.
Is this a college class? Because I want to go to this college that has a class on Avett Brothers music, or what's it all about? So the
Yeah.
book, the book is called whoops, I lost my page here. Theology and the Avett Brothers. That's the name of the book.
Hmm.
Tell me about this. What is
Yeah.
what is the whole idea behind it? How did it happen, and what's it all about?
Yeah. Well, there's a book series it's a part of. It's a pop culture, religion, and theology series. And so I was following along. I had a few chapters and a few other of the books in the series. And I've kind of set on this idea of the Avett brothers probably since May at Last, their documentary,
Sure.
Jude Apatow, 2007, maybe. I could be making that up.
I'm
Um,
not going to hold you to it. I
yeah,
can't remember either.
yeah. And there was this scene in there at the very end. You'll probably remember when they're recording No Hard Feelings. It's kind of the most kind of powerful
Sure.
moment in the documentary. The last chord strums, and Scott looks like dejected
Hmm.
at the end. And like people are coming up, and Rick Rubin, right, the legend, is like, great job, amazing. And he's like, yeah, okay.
Right.
And he goes outside, he's silent. And it was this idea that kind of came out. I'm gonna kind of paraphrase. That song sells, and it sucks because it's born out of so much suffering, right? Like this idea, this tension that I maybe find in good art or good music is that
Hmm.
like the most broken moments and the most broken people often create maybe the most beautiful art. And for me, like that's a deeply theological concept, right? Like Christ on the cross, and like there's the paradigm of beauty. And so that was kind of the genesis of it, like that phrase. And then it just kind of emerged, just listening to their music and sitting with it a little bit longer and seeing all of these longings, these mysteries that they're exploring in a non sectarian, non kind of doctrinal way, right? They're not telling us what to believe, right? They're
Right.
not. It's not a sermon, right? Nobody would accuse them of preaching.
Definitely not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they're kind of exploring these. What a lot of authors actually in the book reference this book by Charles Taylor, which is kind of this 900-page philosophical meandering from like Reformation to today. How did we get to 500 years ago? The kind of common person believed in God,
Hmm.
and 500 years later, it seems like the common belief it's harder to believe in God. Like that's not the kind of neutral ground. What happened? He kind of has 900 pages to explain.
Right.
But one of the things he kind of talks about in this secular age is kind of like the paradigm of the secular age is to be spiritual but not religious, right? We've kind of grown out of the bondage of denominationalism, the bondage of institutional church or institutional religion, and we're kind of exploring these religious longings in spiritual modes. Um, and I think that the Avett brothers really exist as kind of like the paradigm of that, right?
Mm.
They have these deep mysteries, these deep longings, that they're exploring, that I think people really connect with. Like, yeah, my if I view life in purely secular way, I'm just a material being. I live and I die, and that's all there is. I mean, some of that is like kind of the modernism failure of like, we can explain everything, right? Let me explain it to you. Science can explain it. And I think people kind of bump up to this and they're like, no, like when somebody dies, it's more than a hunk of flesh. When I feel love, it's more than brain neurons firing. When
Hmm.
I see the darkness or beauty of my own soul, there's something more going on than just what I can explain. And I think like the Avett brothers really dive into that lane and unearth it for us. And what I think that good art and their music does, it unearths it for us. And we have these like in a concert be like, oh, you feel it too. That's kind
Mm.
of how the intro of the book kind of like that's part of the genesis of it is like, oh, you're feeling these longings, these mysteries, these heart desires, these broken realities. And I thought I was the only one. And so
Scott
that's,
is such a deep thinker. Like you
yeah,
have you ever heard any of the like the talks he has where he talks about stuff like exactly like you're saying.
totally,
He's an
totally.
extremely deep thinker and
Mm-hmm.
feels everything and puts it into his lyrics. And his Seth is the same way, but I think Scott's a little deeper with
Mm-hmm.
all of that. And I just think it's amazing the way it translates to other people and how everyone kind of feels that, exactly what
Yeah.
you're saying. Uh, so,
Yeah, and I think too. I mean, I think there's differences in the brothers, and I think like one of them, like I heard a talk that Scott gave where he's talking about his kind of spiritual background, right, from his Methodist background
sure.
to kind of these new mystical writings that he's exploring, whether that be
Like,
Rumi or
and I
Teresa of
think he read
Avila.
his grandfather's writings a
Yeah,
lot too, who
totally,
was a
totally.
preacher and
Hmm.
he grew up going to church and all that. And yeah, yeah, it had
Yeah,
played a big part in all of this.
yeah, and so I think that kind of, if I could call it the deeper oneness of all things, like David Foster Wallace has the novelist of 20 years ago or so, had this great, this commencement address at Kenyon College where he talks about, um, we all have this longing for something to worship, right? Everybody worships. And you can worship power and you'll always feel weak. You can worship your intellect, you'll always feel dumb. And so there's that kind of, it's not a moralistic lesson, but for whatever reason, to worship Allah or the Wiccan Mother Goddess or the Four Noble Truths is that everything else will eat you alive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of, and so he has this phrase that like there's this oneness of all things, this love that surpasses all things. And I think what the Avett brothers really unearthed that. And I wanted to explore those things, and I didn't feel competent enough to do it on my own. And so I kind of invited others. So it's an edited volume. I'm not the only author. I'm author one chapter, and then I kind of
Okay.
invite others
Yeah, I
to
saw that it said edited by, it
right.
had your name. So that's why I didn't say you were the author of this book, because that was going to be one of my questions.
Yeah.
How did you do? I see that there's a bunch of different essays that go
Mm-hmm.
in together to make the book. So
Yeah.
go into that. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of the process with this series is that there's a call for papers, right? So, other kind of academic people who are interested in this, the pop culture topic, and I kind of view kind of my calling vocation is kind of like deeply rooted in historic documents commenting on recent phenomena, right?
Mm.
Kind of most um, foundationally. And there's a lot of other people who are like, yeah, I don't want to just think about the new and novel. I need some depth. I need some history. I need some roots. I need some philosophy to think about clearly these things that are going on today. And there's a decent amount of people interested in those conversations. And so you put out a call for papers. There plenty of kind of submissions that came in that kind of, hey, this is my abstract. This is what I want to talk about in a chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were a few specific asks of people who I knew, well, for people, some I knew, like the Avett brothers.
Yeah.
Hey, would you have willing to have time to submit something? and others that were like it was like scrounging, right? Like, I know you're interested in theology. I think you like music. Do you like the specific genre of the Avett brothers? Right? Like, so it's kind of like these kind of like you have to like you have to be interested in theology. You have to kind of be interested in theology in a conversation, and that conversation has to be tied to the Avett brothers. So it is a little bit of a niche, but as we even discussed before and on, like there's plenty of solid fans of the Avett brothers
Oh
who
my gosh, yeah.
would be interested. Yeah,
All they need to see is the name Avett on the and the picture of Scott on the cover, and you're
that's
in.
right.
I mean, you're going to sell it
That's
to them.
right.
But I think the idea of this is fascinating. Can you explain, go into a little bit of detail on some of the chapters, like what is talked about?
Yeah.
I know a lot of their lyrics and stuff, have religious ties and stuff.
Mhm.
They are not preachy at all, but it's all obviously part of their upbringing, comes from their dad and their grandfather. But explain some
Yeah.
of it if you can, like what some of
Yeah.
the chapters talk about.
Yeah. I think too. I mean, I think just kind of going back on the note of kind of the secular age, right? Like that the last sacred experiences. I think the guy who wrote the foreword to this, James K. A. Smith, is kind of a prolific writer, really, um, really wise guide in the world, and he comments on a secular age, that book by Charles Taylor, and he says the last sacred experiences in a secular age are the art gallery and the concert hall.
Hmm.
Right? Like those are the moments of transcendence where people feel like this can't be all there is. Like there's got to be something more than
Right.
physicality, materiality. And I think like, if you've gone to an Avett Brothers concert or any concert, there's this kind of like oneness of like, you don't, I wouldn't call it worship, but something like the feelings people get in worship, right?
It
Like,
really is. It's really weird. Like I was just at a show 3 days ago in Lafayette, New York. Got
yeah,
to see him, and it was pouring rain most of the show and cold and windy, but everyone was happy. And their music just makes you dance and be happy. And that
yeah,
that fan base is a family. And
yeah,
it's crazy how it works. Like I've never ever in my life experienced anything like the Avett thing because
yeah.
it's more than
It's
just
transcendent,
music.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's transcendent. Yeah. You can't explain it, right? Like
And my wife
you're
thinks I'm crazy because it's a band, but it's so she hasn't listened, she doesn't get it. Other people don't get it. They think I'm nuts, but there is something going on there that's not
yeah,
normal, and
yeah,
I love it. I just love
yeah,
every bit of it.
yeah, yeah.
So I
That's
need to read your book.
yeah, it's beautiful. Um, so yeah, I kind of I think it's 10 chapters,
Hmm.
and I put it into five different moves in the introduction. The first one is like what is the good life, which is kind of like a foundational question, right? Like everybody pursues, this goes back to St. Augustine in the fourth century, everybody pursues a happy life. He says the person who goes to war and the person who avoids war, they are doing different things, but they're doing it for the same purpose. One thinks going to war will make them happy and honorable and famous.
Hmm.
Another person says, I don't want to die. And so I'm choosing a happy life for something else. And so the first author, Jeffrey Tabone, talks about like, well, what is the good life in the Avetts discography? Right? Like, how are they thinking about what a good life is? What makes a good life?
Hmm.
And I think like you can even see that explored through like their early years of kind of like, romantic songs and kind of love will make them happy to kind of like a more maturing, lyrics, right? Like as they go on, they still have love lyrics, right? All those things are still present in their lives, yet they're I think they're trying to figure out what is a good life,
Sure, the
right?
pretty girl songs come to mind, like that
Yeah.
as like the early stuff,
Hmm.
and they have definitely more mature songs now
Yeah, I
than
mean,
way back
like
then.
the third gleam, right? Like all these kind of more
Sure.
public political. I don't want to say political, but more public facing
That's
than
more closer than together with the kind of political stuff, even
yeah,
though it wasn't super political, but they did
right. Yeah, I mean,
kind of
yeah,
push the boundaries of
it's not
political.
partisan, but it's
Right.
public, right?
Right.
It's
Sure.
they're talking about the world.
More grown up.
Yeah, right. And then so it's kind of like, what's the good life? A commentary on the soul. So both kind of the beauty of the beauty and brokenness of life and how we live life and the kind of the unearthing of what's here.
Yeah.
And then kind of the empathetic imagination that emerges from entering into someone else's suffering that is both like yours and different than yours, which good, I think, again, good art does. It kind of develops this empathetic imagination, which says, I see what you're going through, and I may not have gone through the same thing, but I can relate with that, or I want to relate with that. Right. And then the third move is to place. So obviously, like home is important, right? They have, right, all these kind of returns to home, these exiles from home, this love for home. And so some of that kind of homemaking. So one of the chapters there is, I think it's by Casey Lute. He actually talks about Clegg, their grandfather's legacy, being passed down lyrically through in their music and through their music. So he kind of takes his sermons and traces them out, which is really interesting. And then another chapter there talks about it's kind of more of a practical ministry of like, what if you had the Avett brothers ideas of home and place in your mind, how would that affect your ministry imagination as you're pastoring or as you're living in a place? So kind of that was from a kind of a practitioner. And then the fourth move is to culture, which is kind of some of these. So the rise of the nuns, right? So not the NUNs, but the NONESs, right? That I claim no religious affiliation.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
And so these two chapters, one by Jeffrey Porter and one by Kevin Allman, who's a colleague of mine at Montreat, takes kind of these ideas and kind of like basically what I've already talked about, like how the Avett brothers are a paradigm, a through line of a secular age. And also in Allman's chapter, he's actually in music business. So he talks a lot about kind of the rise of the Avett brothers, kind of from their small days to their bigger days. And he does some interviews with fans. And so like one of those is one young girl says, the Avett brothers are the closest thing I have to church.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like this, like outside of institutional religion, like this is where I feel transcendence. And so he kind of tracks some of those things.
And I 100% get that. I mean, that's, I was just talking about that experience. It's church-like. It really is.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful, true reality. And then the last chapter, not to maybe be the downer, but I felt like this was the best place for it, is death.
And they sing a lot about death.
Yeah, you can't miss it.
No.
I think I was reading some interview where like, I think they went into, might have been Third Gleam, or it might have been the album they made for May It Last, which, but they said something like, we're not gonna sing about death this time.
Yeah, right.
Sure enough, like there's, it just always comes up.
Was it Seth that said in May It Last, we've been accused of being fatalists or something like that? They sing about it a lot.
They do. And I think that's so interesting, right? In a secular age, which is defined by you are born and you die, nothing comes before you, nothing will last after you, kind of a YOLO, right? Yeah. This is all there is. Yet death is like this great mystery, which it is, but this kind of question mark, right? Like, is it really? Like, does that make sense of your world best, that you just rot in the ground forever?
Right.
And I think like it is a secular question that must be answered, right? Like,
how can it be answered? Because we don't know.
Right.
It's like something that you think about your whole life. And you
maybe
can never know the answer to it.
As much as a question to be explored, right? Like, and not ignored, right? I think that that's I wrote an article about this artist, this visual artist, photographer named Andres Serrano, whose kind of famous artwork is Piss Christ, where he submerges a crucifix in piss, and religious conservatives get all kind of bent out of shape about it. I think
Interesting.
I think it's actually right. There's an article that talks about this, that like, is it that the piss taints Christ, or that Christ can sanctify piss? Right? Like, it's an interesting take.
I know what I'm Googling after we get done with this.
Yeah, right.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, it's really interesting. But so anyway, he has this other set of photographies, which is called the morgue, where he goes into a literal morgue and takes pictures of dead bodies.
Wow. Okay.
Big size. And it's not a funeral home, right? It's a morgue where like there's some violence or some kind of seedy behavior behind it, and people are kind of maybe rightly repulsed by it. But if you are functioning by a purely secular philosophy, which says that thing is organisms gathered together, there is nothing more sacred in that body than the roadkill you pass on the side of the road.
Right.
Does that make sense of what you're experiencing when you see just a picture of a dead body? There seems to be something else. Why would you be repulsed any more than you would seeing roadkill, right? Like there's these questions that he's wanting people to explore who have ignored death altogether, and just like, let's not talk about it, let's not think about it.
Right.
It's really like, the philosophical tradition, religious tradition of memento mori, remember your death.
Right.
It's a very clarifying reality that ought to orientate our life, but I feel like something that by and large, right, funeral homes are pushed into sides of town where we're gonna have to think about it, don't have to see them.
Right.
But the Avett brothers, right, have risen to popularity not by talking about death, but it's something you can't avoid hearing
or seeing, because Scott, with his art, the memento mori artwork that is in so many of their drawings and stuff. I mean, that style, that with the skull, the hourglass, and the flower, that's all memento mori, death, life, all that stuff.
Yeah, you got to confront it. So that's kind of how it ends in death. As all
that's
things
fitting, right?
That's right.
Well, that sounds awesome. I can't wait to get my hands on this book. I've got to see if they're available everywhere, I assume, right? Wherever you can get books.
I think technically it's still pre-order. And
okay, because people are getting them, they're showing up.
Yeah, so I think Kindle versions will come, or like e-copy readers will come here. And I know my author copies were sent, and I have not yet held it in my hand, but I'm hoping any day now.
You haven't even had one yet?
I've seen it on a computer screen. I have not yet held it in my copy. Part of that may be because we just moved, and so it could have been sent to the previous address and forwarded.
That makes sense, because the public should not be getting these before you. That just seems wrong.
Ideally, but I guess they paid for them and I didn't. But I would like to have one personally.
Well, yeah, you should at least have one, right? You gotta have one. All right, so you gotta send one to Scott Avett too.
Yeah,
right, because he's got it. He would eat this book up. This is right up his alley.
Yeah, and that's kind of so. That's what it was really fun. So talking to Bob Crawford about the afterword, and so I sent him the chapters, and he was reading along, and he was like, "Man, I'm reading these. I'm enjoying them, but like one thing's missing. Scott would love these.
Yeah,
Can I share them with him? Like I would say, no, you can't. Like, yeah, I guess you can.
So he's read the book then already.
Bob has at least parts of it.
Yeah.
Scott, I don't know if he has. They were thinking about, Bob was trying to bring him in to write the afterword with him, or part of it with him. But they're busy people, and so I'm not.
Well, they are, but
yeah. So I know he's at least aware of it. And how much he's read of it is TBD. But I hope he reads it and enjoys it. And
he's got to. It's too much up his alley not to. And it includes him, so
it would feel weird. Like I'm just thinking about, like, if somebody wrote, right, not that anybody would ever do this, like the theology of Alex Sosler, I'd be like, I don't know, that's too close, like.
Well, anyway,
Hopefully it's both kind of clarifying and enlightening and encouraging if he does get his hands on it.
Scott will get it. He will read it, and I'm sure he will like it because again, it's too much him to not.
Yeah.
I've got so many questions for you here. We're running out of time quickly already. One question that actually a fan sent that I want to read because it kind of goes in with one thing I wanted to ask you. Tara Hackett asks, she said, I'm so interested how this came to happen. Were you drawn to the Avett brothers sound first and then took their message and decided to explore more deeply as a study, or how did that work for you?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Good question. Yeah, it was definitely I intro this, I don't give too much away, but I intro the book this way. I have a confession. I thought the Avett brothers were just okay. At one time in my life, I just thought, there's some songs I like, and this gets into like the music got me, right? Like, and I think maybe it's their development in some ways too. Like, loved I and Loving You and Laundry Room, like these kind of either catchy or singable songs that you could stomp your, foot to, and
sure.
it was likable, right? It was kind of had its own charismatic appeal. Um, but like I said, what really got, I guess it was neither the lyrics or the sound, but it was really the documentary, which is
Hmm,
I compare the documentary to like a concert, like seeing somebody in concert, right? Like
sure.
there's this affinity that you take on after you see somebody really good in concert. That's like I liked them, but seeing them in action did something different, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
attached to them now. And I felt like that's what made it last well, in particular that last scene. And I think like seeing the intimate portrait and kind of the brothers' relationship and the band and the Rick Rubin record, like all of it was
Well, you're in
so
the middle of it. You're behind the
yeah,
scenes, basically.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was really that like seeing I approached the Avett brothers superficially.
Hmm.
And so I listened to their music I thought they were superficial, and not superficial, but it's like it's a popular band, and so I just always assume like there's not depth there, but it has
Right.
beat. And I think this is like the pop culture thing I'm interested in, right? Idea that I'm interested in. That like it's it's not high culture, but pop culture can contain high culture ideas if we let it speak. But
Hmm.
if we just approach it as this is superficial and shallow, then you're going to get superficial and shallow.
Right.
So I'm interested in kind of like how can pop culture reveal depth and intrigue and mystery. Um, that's the conversation I'm interested in, kind of most.
All right. I like that. So man, you are officially the smartest person that's been on this show, I think. So no offense to any of my other guests that I've had. But are you friendly with Jim Avett? Do you know Jim?
I don't. I don't.
I need to introduce you to him because you and him could have amazing conversations. Like you should write a book with
Yeah.
Jim Avett
Yeah.
about all this stuff. If you
Yeah.
have you ever thought of that before?
I haven't, but I'd love it. That'd be amazing. I mean, I found out. So Montreat College is right next to Black Mountain, near Asheville, and for whatever I don't scour, concert goings, but I like missed Jim Avett in a small venue in Black Mountain. I guess it was probably 6 months ago at this point, but like by
Yeah.
a day, like I saw he was there. I was like, dang it, why didn't nobody tell me about this?
Yeah, right.
And so that was my bad, but I would love to
All right,
meet him.
I'm gonna get him hooked up with you because you guys
Okay.
should seriously write a book together
Okay,
about
done.
this, like involve Clegg and the whole thing, and do
Yeah.
do something different than what this one's about. But
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
gotta meet Jim, and
Well,
you'll be instant friends with him.
if
He's
it
such a nice
happens, it'll
guy.
be dedicated to you.
Oh, well, hey, now we got to make it happen. All right. Well, we are super running out of time here. So I wanted to and again, my gosh, I have like 50 questions in front of me that I have asked none of, but I'm having you pick the music for the show. I always have the guests pick the music, and I want you to talk about what songs you picked and why you picked them for this
Yeah.
episode. So go ahead.
Yeah. I'll have to. I kind of forgot. I have a short memory. Let me pull
Wait,
it up real quick.
yeah, I've got them right here too.
Yeah. So I know at least I have no hard feelings. I'm
Yep,
98% sure. And that's because, right, what we've talked about already, kind of that formative moment in my development with them. I think I have a high step in.
you did
Is that
have
right?
High Steppin', yeah,
Yeah,
which they
that
played live at the show I was at 3 days ago, and that was awesome.
yeah. I mean, I think that was more of an ode to my chapter in some ways because like, especially with the nod to the music video, like the sort of skeletal Grim Reaper,
Yeah,
but with this kind of joyful stomping involved when talking about death, like just kind of epitomizes them for me in some ways. Um, do I have I Am Loving You on
you
there?
have I Am Loving You. Yep, you're
Yeah,
going
I
right
mean,
in order here. You're doing good.
perfect. And that's just because like that was my if um No Hard Feelings was my introduction to depth. I think I Am Loving You was like my introduction to them. Like the first song I had
Just
heard from them.
first song period. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good one to hook you.
Yeah. Do I have one more Avett on there?
You have I Am Loving You, No Hard Feelings, High Steppin'. Then you have All You Despise from the Blue Rags.
Yeah. And so I'd heard the Blue Rags was very influential in Scott's kind of musical development and kind of taking the banjo but making it uh speak fun, not bluegrassy without being traditional
Yeah,
bluegrass.
no, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
And so the Blue Rags, I think, is kind of like a developmental um in between, I think, for them. So that's why I picked that one. I think I have Nirvana in
You do.
there.
You have Lake of Fire by Nirvana, which
Yeah, I mean,
that's
I
off
think
of one of my favorite albums of all time, their live unplugged
uh,
album.
I think it was one of
Absolutely
my
phenomenal.
first, when you could order CDs from a magazine in school. I think I remember doing that like way
How old
back.
are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I am 33, almost
Oh
34.
my gosh, you're
I'm
so
a,
much
I'm
younger than me.
I am a young guy. I know that's
Yeah, I was a Nirvana guy when Nirvana like was new and
yeah, yeah,
back in
yeah.
the early 90s. So
Yeah, I was
that
kind of like the middle school kind of punk rocker
yeah.
but yeah, so Nirvana, I think like that kind of grunginess you can hear in that song, like it's the rawness of Nirvana,
Oh,
I think kind
you
of
could
shows
feel all of Kurt
that
Cobain's
influence.
pain in
Yeah,
every one of those songs. And that was like, my gosh, that was like 3 months before he died, or was it 3 months or 6 months, whatever. It's
pretty
close to
close.
when he died.
Yeah,
So
so I
he
think like
was
that just it reminds me of the Avett Brothers a lot.
sure. Okay.
And then I think I have Jim Avett.
Yeah, you got Jim with Down by the Riverside.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, that gospel album just kind of like that in some ways kind of relating it to that place homemaking like um I think this is true. I think I can say this. You can kind of move on from the church and that's fine. Like it is what it is, but it kind of stays with you kind of
Mm.
deep in there. And especially like if it's rooted in your family like
Sure.
generationally.
Oh yeah.
And I think like I talk to students all the time who like if you are running from some, by and large, right? There's some cases where I wouldn't suggest, but if you're running from something and you can't say something positive about where you came from, you're not ready to leave yet, right? Because you're just hurting and you think going someplace else will heal you. And I think like I'm sure the brothers have matured, moved on, changed, modified. But I think there's still like deep love and appreciation for their father, for their grandfather, for the
Absolutely.
church, right? Like it's not animosity, even if they have moved on. It's deep appreciation for their roots.
And think how much they bring Jim up on stage with them when he travels to
Yeah,
shows and they sing
right.
gospel songs. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a super religious person, but
Yeah,
I absolutely love when they sing gospel songs. I could listen to them all day long. I
yeah,
don't know what
yeah,
it is. And they're just, it's spectacular.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So I wanted, especially in theology and the Avett Brothers, I figured a good kind of gospel song would be fitting.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So from your soon to be friend Jim Avett.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
I will get him in touch with you, and you guys will hit it off and write books and dedicate them to me.
That's
So
right. That's right.
I have
It's all coming together.
one more fan question, and then I have one other question for you. Let's see. I still got 3 minutes, so we're doing all right.
I'll be quick.
Teresa Ann wants to know that she says she would love to know your thoughts on Richard Rohr.
Hmm.
I'm not really familiar with Richard Rohr, but
Yeah. So Richard
quickly
Rohr,
give me what your thoughts are on him.
yeah, he's mentioned in the book a few times. I know
Oh,
I
okay.
looked through the chapters. Big influence on Scott, and so he's kind of in many ways, like he's a Catholic priest
Mm-hmm.
who's kind of a mystical spiritualist, universalist, and so like all kind of paths lead to a divine power, and it's kind of going to the same place. Um, and so I would say I appreciate a lot of what Rohr brings to the table, kind of the mystery that he brings unearths for readers, and kind of like a moving on from like the dissensional reactionary movements within Christendom. Um, I tend to be a little bit more theologically conservative than Rohr. However, I think he brings out from the mystical tradition a lot that can serve the church at large, me, and others who read him.
All right, that's pretty good. That was quick and to the point. I like that.
Yeah, it's the what's the fast round, speed round, whatever it's called.
The Cliff Notes version.
That's right. That's right.
That's probably before your time. You probably don't
No,
even know
no,
what
no.
Cliff
I
Notes
got it.
are.
We call it AI now. I mean, you just
Right, right.
AI now.
All right. So my last question for you is, how many Avett shows have you been to?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask.
Oh no! Don't tell me it's zero.
So to be fair, I will preface it with I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old.
Okay.
So the last 8 years have been and really kind of my formative Avett fan, where I've wanted so bad to go to a show, have been filled with children and hard to escape them.
You got to bring the kids to the show.
I
That's the
know,
fun of
I
it. You
know. They're
can
old.
too.
I mean, most of them are old enough now. They can go. So my confession, which is I'm embarrassed to even say that I
I'm
have not
sorry I asked.
attended. You just cut this out. I have not been to one. However, I hope to soon remedy that. Like I was trying to even like, can I go to? They're in New York this weekend, right?
Yeah, they were in New York for the
Or
past
New
three
York,
shows, and now they're in
DC.
Wolf
They're in,
Trap. They're in
yeah,
Virginia this weekend.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Where my family in laws are at, and so I was like, can I sneak up there this weekend? Can I justify that?
Oh man.
But yes, soon. I
You
hope.
got to. You
I know.
have to go because it's amazing.
There is, yes, I know, I know, I
The,
know.
the 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 fan base will embrace you. No one's gonna hold it against you. It's all good.
I
Uh
hope not. Don't stone me.
that's funny. What's your website so people can find the book?
Yeah, my website's alexsosler.com, alexsosler.com. You can also find the book on Amazon, and then it's published with Fortress Press and Lexington Press. So I think it's Rowan Littlefield is the website that those are kind of sub publishers of,
Okay.
where you can find it there. And I'll try to get you. There's a 30% off discount
Let's go.
for this book, and so I'll get you the discount code. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but hopefully you can put it in the show notes or something.
Awesome. Sounds good. We are going to run out of time. This cuts off